Welcome to the Voca Society YouTube channel. We're going to be talking about kind of a different topic today, how Christmas is in itself a liturgy, and how seeing it as a liturgy can help us to see Christmas as an act of worship. But before we get there, we need to talk about, what do I mean when I say the word liturgy? Simply put, a liturgy is just a habit or a routine. Usually liturgy is talked about in terms of a worship service. It's the routine or form that our worship takes in public worship. For example, in our church, a few of the elements of our liturgy are that we sing songs, we read scripture, we hear the word preached, we recite the Apostles' Creed, we take the Lord's Supper, and then we sing more songs. So that is our liturgy. That is the form or the routine that worship takes in our church. Now, there's a lot of freedom because the way that worship looks is going to look different in different cultures and different denominations and different contexts. And so liturgy is simply the form that a worship service takes. But here's the thing, liturgy doesn't just apply to worship services because we are all worshipers. The Bible talks about worship as a way of life in verses like Romans 12, 1 through 2. Therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. This verse is highlighting that everything that we do in our bodies, our everyday lives, is an act of worship. It's our spiritual service. And so I want to broaden our understanding of liturgy and our definition of liturgy to include our everyday lives and the routines of our everyday lives. If our lives are to be a spiritual service of worship, as this verse says, then how can liturgy play a part in our daily routines and practices? Let's take, for example, our morning routines. So some of us may sit in our bed and scroll on our phone for a few minutes before we roll out of bed. Some of us may stumble bleary-eyed toward the coffee machine. That is definitely my morning routine. We may or may not be aware of our routines, but we all have them. And here's the important thing about routines. They shape us. Even secular authors have been recognizing this fact in books like Atomic Habits by James Clear or The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. They recognize that habits and routines are an inescapable part of our lives and that those routines shape our lives in a significant way. As Christians, we want our hearts to be in love with Jesus, but one of the things that we often overlook is the power that habits and routines have in shaping our affections. When I spend time scrolling my phone on Pinterest before I roll out of bed in the morning, it's telling me what I should worship. It's telling me this is what the good life looks like. And now there's nothing wrong with scrolling on Pinterest before you wake up, but it is good to be aware of our liturgies and to be aware of those other narratives so that we can be sure that we have ones in place that point our hearts to Jesus and to see him as most worthy. Have you ever been frustrated by the disconnect between what you know or believe and what you actually do? I know I certainly have. And the reason for this is that we are driven primarily not by what we believe cognitively, but actually by our affections, what we love. James K.A. Smith says, while doctrinal orthodoxy is crucial in the Christian life, for the most part, we are not primarily motivated by our conscious thoughts. We do not usually think about our beliefs or worldview as we brush our teeth, go grocery shopping, or drive our cars. Most of what shapes our life is our loves. This realization totally changed my life. I used to get so frustrated by the sanctification process because I was trying to think or believe my way out of sinful patterns. And our thoughts definitely do play a huge role in our sanctification. But oftentimes, simply knowing that I shouldn't do something is not enough to keep me from not doing it. What I need is what Thomas Chalmers called the expulsive power of a new affection. We are sanctified slowly, day by day, when we see Jesus as more attractive than our sin. This is called the expulsive power of a new affection. Our hearts just don't have as much room to sin when they are so taken with Christ. We see this illustrated in verses like 2 Corinthians 3:18. We all with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. And 1 John 3:2. We know that when he appears, we shall be like him because we shall see him as he is. When Jesus comes back and we see him in all of his beauty and his glory, it's going to instantly transform us because we're just going to see how much more attractive he is than our sin ever could be to us. And that same process is happening on a micro level, day by day, as we see Jesus in the pages of Scripture and see his beauty and his glory. And this is why our habits and our routines and our liturgies have so much power in our lives, because we're not just thinking beings, we are embodied creatures. We see this in the incarnation, that Jesus took on a human body. We live an embodied faith. We are not merely brains, we are physical creatures that need to incorporate our whole bodies, our whole beings into our worship. And that's why Jesus gave us visible reminders like the Lord's Supper and baptism, things that are very tangible and very visible and real, things that we can touch and taste and smell and hear. Jesus could have given us really spiritual practices, but he didn't. He gave us very down to earth, very visible, very real and tangible things to grab a hold of, because there's something about the physicality of those things that helps us to draw our hearts into what is being pictured. To learn a story, we can't just hear it, we need to act it out. And that's why Jesus gave us those very visible, tangible signs. Liturgy is powerful because it brings our whole being, our whole person into worship. So let's bring this back to Christmas. Christmas is in itself a liturgy. The annual routine of it, all the traditions, even though they are meaningless apart from the reality, it all helps orient our hearts to Jesus. It brings us as full beings into the act of worshiping Christ. And that's what really encouraged my heart this year, was realizing Christmas is a liturgy. And I was reading this book. It's called Every Moment Holy by Douglas McKelvey, and I highly recommend this book. This is a book of prayers that you can pray at seemingly random and mundane moments, and it's actually really cool to help draw your heart into worship in the moments that we typically don't know how to connect to our faith. So here are a few excerpts from what he wrote about Christmas. Our glittering ornaments and Christmas trees, our festive carols, our sumptuous feasts, by these small tokens we affirm that something amazing has happened in time and space. That God, on a particular night in a particular place, so many years ago, was born to us, an infant king, our Prince of Peace. Our wreaths and ribbons and colored lights, our giving of gifts, our parties with friends, these have never been ends in themselves. They are but small ways in which we repeat the sounding joy first proclaimed by angels in the skies near Bethlehem. In view of such great tidings of love announced to us and to all people, how can we not be moved to praise and celebration in this Christmas season? As we decorate our tree and as we feast and laugh and sing together, we are rehearsing our coming joy. We are making ready to receive the one who has already, with open arms, received us. So Christmas is a liturgy. Christmas is a corporate way that we get to embody a retelling of the Advent story as a form of worship. I probably wouldn't have done this video series, and you probably wouldn't be watching these videos right now if we didn't have the annual tradition of celebrating Christmas. I think this is so beautiful because it frees Christmas from the empty sentimentality and commercialism that often taints our experience of Christmas. There's nothing intrinsically holy about eating cream puffs on December the 25th, or decorating our tree, or listening to Christmas music, or whatever traditions you have. But when we do them each year, we are engaging our hearts and our bodies and our minds and our senses in a retelling of the Advent story that helps to orient our hearts and our affections toward Christ. So what does this all have to do with our work lives? Well, many secular people have recognized the power of habit, and I think it's good to connect that idea theologically to our faith and to recognize why habits have such a profound effect on us. When we realize that we have ordinary, everyday liturgies, it helps us to be able to be intentional about what those are and have liturgies and routines that point our affections toward Christ. I actually did a podcast episode on this topic called Rhythms of Grace last year, and I will drop a link to it in the description box. But my goal in sharing this with you is not that you would copy and paste my routines or my liturgies into your day, but rather that it would just be a springboard for you to be able to think through and be intentional about your daily routines. I can't close this episode without pointing you to tomorrow's episode that's premiering on YouTube, and it's all about the person of Christ. Our liturgies, our traditions, all of it is empty and completely meaningless unless it is pointing us to the person of Jesus. My hope and prayer for that next episode is just that it will put forth the beauty and the glory of Christ in a way that makes your heart long for him just a little bit more. I hope this reflection has encouraged you and given you some beautiful truths to be able to carry into your work life and your personal life in this next year. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I have lots more content coming your way about applying theology to work life. Also, I know that being an entrepreneur is a long and lonely road. So if you are a Christian woman who is looking for a group of Christian business women to live life with and do business with, come join us in the Voca Society. You can use the code ADVENT to get a free month and come check us out. I can't wait to see you there. Merry Christmas.